There is danger from all men. The only maxim of a free government ought to be to trust no man living with power to endanger the public liberty. How unstable must the Israelite Confederacy have been at the moment of Saul's death? And how authoritarian is the king in waiting? Readers of the Bible never think of David as a schemer or conniver, but as a pure heart. But make no mistake, the Israelite Confederacy is dying, to be supplanted by a new warrior king whose entire reign would be consumed with bloodshed. Make no mistake, the charismatic new leader still has his share of political battles. Saul, it seems, has one surviving son by the name of Eshbaal. The Bible renames him, however, the hypothetical proto-David narrative calling him Ish-Boshet, a man of disgrace. In those days, the captain of Saul's army, Abner, decides to transfer the capital of the Confederacy eastward to Mahanaim across the Jordan River, where he crowns Eshbaal king. If David is really the godly character he's made out to be, why doesn't he step aside at this moment and let Saul's rightful heir take the throne? Instead, David moves to consolidate power by persuading the elders of Judah to anoint him king in Hebron, which he makes his capital, at least for the time being. Due to this link with David and with Abraham, who is buried there, Hebron was destined to become a flashpoint in the Arab-Israeli conflict to this day. Still a shrewd politician, David uses a bitter quarrel that breaks out between Abner and Eshbaal to overcome them both. Eshbaal is assassinated in the end, and David now rules as undisputed monarch. He will, however, live by the sword for the rest of his life. His first action will be to attack the Canaanite stronghold of Jebus, a move undertaken for purely political reasons. David recognizes something that America's founders implicitly grasped, that in order to hold a confederacy together, a centrally located capital would be a key ingredient. He and his general, Joab, attack Jebus by stealth, gaining entrance to the city via an underground water channel that cuts directly beneath the walls and fortified towers. The unsuspecting inhabitants are taken by surprise and promptly massacred. David, of course, is never one to shrink from bloodshed. The city will henceforth be known as Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, the city of peace. From this moment, Jerusalem will play a central role in Jewish history from generation to generation. It will also become a major point of contention in world geopolitics. Ironically, and perhaps as part of David's legacy, it will never be known as a place of peace. David was arguably a man with just the right qualities for ruling in a brutal age. But the painful truth is that he wants absolute power. His major policy goal is to conquer the entire land of Canaan, which none of the previous judges was ever able to accomplish. David twice trounces the very Philistines with whom he had previously consorted. The Israelite ruler next sets his sights on Transjordan in the east, conquering the kingdoms of both Moab and Edom. He finds himself ruling over both major trade routes in the region, the Via Maris, hugging the Mediterranean coast from Egypt, and the King's Highway, passing through the eastern desert. We're even told that he conquers Damascus itself and extends his realm all the way to the Euphrates River. But is this truth or spin? Some critics allege that the extent of David's empire is wildly exaggerated, and a few go as far as to question whether King David was any more historical than, say, King Arthur. A few remarkable ancient inscriptions have surfaced referencing the name David, but no archaeological evidence bears witness to David's kingdom encompassing vast amounts of territory stretching all the way to the Euphrates. There is, however, an important inscription found at the biblical site of Tel Dan in northern Galilee, referring to the house of David. It dates from the 9th or 8th centuries BCE, and it might just be the smoking gun we are looking for to prove that David existed. In any case, tradition would have us believe that Israel reaches a high point of military and political dominance under David, becoming a major power in the ancient Near East. But is the new emperor brilliant and far-sighted, or is he an ancient Napoleon? The one thing everyone can agree on is that the illustrious King David possessed multiple personal peccadillos. Take, for example, the Bathsheba incident. He spots her one day while surveying the grandeur of Jerusalem from the rooftop of his palace, gloriously sunbathing on the roof of her own house. The suddenly infatuated David sends for her, presumably because he can. Bathsheba is the wife of a Hittite mercenary currently off waging one of David's expansionist wars against the Ammonites. In ancient Israel, it's quite kosher for a man to have multiple women. He can have as many wives and concubines as he pleases. But by an admittedly sexist double standard, a woman can have only one man. When David proceeds to sleep with Bathsheba, he's committing adultery not against her, but against her husband, Uriah the Hittite. Worse still, Bathsheba becomes pregnant with his child. Next comes part 2 in the playbook of political scandals, the cover-up. Let's call it Bathsheba Gate. David, unwilling to face judgment for his misdeed, now connives to hide his paternity. David decides that Uriah must be eliminated. He orders that Uriah be sent to the front line of battle, and that his comrades should withdraw when the enemy approaches. He correctly guesses that Uriah will be killed in the heavy fighting. It's time for a prophet named Nathan, to step in. Nathan approaches the king and tells him a story. There was a poor shepherd who had a single prized ewe lamb that he dearly loved. Not far away lived a very rich man with many herds of sheep and cattle, who sent for the poor man's lamb and prepared it for his visiting guest. David and the prophet exchange words.
Chai Hashem, כי בן מוות האיש העושה זאת. אתה האיש, מדוע בזית את דבר השם לעשות הרע בעיניי? חטאתי להשם.
David falls into deep mourning, asking the divine will to spare the child of his beloved Bathsheba. But no amount of repentance will do the trick. When the child is born, he quickly falls ill and dies. But rather than continuing in a state of mourning, the usual Jewish practice after a death, David gets up, washes himself, and goes about his business, declaring that as long as there was hope, he would mourn. But now that the child is dead, there's nothing more to do. Nevertheless, he's officially contrite, And he writes a very nice psalm.
חנני אלוהים כחסדך, כי רוב רחמך מחה פשעי. הרב כבסני מעווני, ומחטאתי טהרני. כי פשעי אני אדע, וחטאתי נגדי תמיד. לך לבדך חטאתי, והרע בעיניך עשיתי. למען תצדק בדבריך, תזכה בשבתך.
It's a deeply touching mea culpa. But on closer examination, though, David seems to deflect blame as the psalm continues.
הן בעוון חוללתי, ובחטא יחמתני אמי.
Do we honestly understand him as saying, the devil made me do it? Is he honestly laying his murderous imperfections at his own mother's doorstep? According to the biblical prophet, there will be no end of strife and bloodshed in David's house. And this fearsome prediction is about to be fulfilled in an episode that pits the king against his own son, Absalom, whose name ironically means father of peace. Absalom's backstory involves the rape of his half-sister Tamar by her full brother Amnon, after which he dispatches his hitmen to murder the vile rapist. King David, unable to inflict the death sentence on his son, instead sends him away for 3 years, then fully reinstating him. It is then that Absalom begins his grand plot for power. Declaring himself king, he proceeds to Hebron, where he raises a standard of revolt. All Israel, including David's favored tribe of Judah, rallies to Absalom, and the rebellion is on. The spin on Absalom is that he consorts with his treacherous advisor, the infamous Ahitophel, while David flees east to Transjordan. David gains the upper hand through intrigue and subversion. The Jerusalem priesthood, led by Abiathar or Aviatar and Tzadok, is still in his pocket, and their sons act as spies on Absalom. The final battle will take place in the wood of Ephraim. David's forces have the strategic advantage, and the battle turns into a rout for Absalom, who ends up clumsily fleeing on a mule, his long hair flowing in the breeze behind him. As he escapes through the thicket, his wavy locks get caught in a low-hanging oak branch. The mule continues on, leaving Absalom dangling above the ground. David's general, Joab, though instructed not to harm the king's son, nonetheless stabs the helpless rebel with 3 spears, leaving his swordsman to finish the job. David is cut to the quick, composing another of his immortal psalms to mourn his tragic loss.
בני אבשלום, בני אבשלום, מי ייתן מותי אני תחתיך, אבשלום, בני.
But Absalom's rebellion will not be the end of disunity and dissent in the ranks of David's kingdom. It will, on the contrary, be a precursor of a great civil war to come. Even after all of David's misfortunes, the Bible still isn't done impugning the great king. David's kingdom is about to be harshly judged. The reason? David takes a census. As divine punishment, 70,000 of David's people perish by plague. Is King David, now properly chastised, any less an egomaniac? Judging by his own behavior down to the end of his life, he's awfully slow as a learner. For David, the ongoing question will be how he can remain king of all the tribes while favoring his own and a single city, Jerusalem. A new rebellion breaks out over the preferential treatment of Judah. Enter Sheba, not to be confused with the famous queen. He's of the lineage of King Saul. It's up to Sheba to shake things up, which he does by raising a new battle cry. "We have no part with David." He proceeds to the secessionist north in another threat to the integrity of David's realm. As usual, David responds with force. He dispatches his mighty men and a contingent of troops along with his general Joab. Hopelessly outnumbered, Sheba takes shelter in a city of northern Galilee, Abel Bet Maacah. An unnamed wise woman convinces Joab to spare the city, since its inhabitants oppose Sheba. She convinces the people of the city to murder the unfortunate rebel. Another rebellion crushed, David can carve another notch in his kingly girdle. He has centralized power in Jerusalem. But even that isn't enough for his monarchy. He must centralize worship as well. Long before, he had brought the Ark of the Covenant up to Jerusalem, though he was mocked by his wife Michal for making a spectacle of himself. Now, well on in years, David is emphatically denied the privilege of building God a temple. The prophet Nathan,
לא תבנה בית לשמי, כי איש מלחמות אתה, ודמים שפכת.
Nonetheless, David had secured his place in Israelite and world history. Like all monarchs, he must in the end designate a worthy successor. His name is Solomon, his son by Bathsheba. The trouble is, as David lay dying, his elder son named Adonijah, Adoniyahu, declares that he should be the rightful king. David orders that Solomon be anointed king, thus denying Adonijah his great ambition. Intrigue follows. David's general Joab and the priest Abiathar side with Adonijah, who compounds things with the request of Solomon that he be given David's servant, also his old-age cuddle bunny, Avishag, as his wife. Correctly perceiving this as a veiled threat to his own succession, Solomon has Adonijah banished, and Joab, along with another of David's foes, Shimei, son of Gerah, put to death. Yet David is forever revered for his godliness, and Solomon for his wisdom. David may have built himself an empire, but he has also bequeathed a nightmare. To paraphrase T.S. Eliot, this is the way tribal confederacies end, not with a bang, but a whimper.